How's it going, everybody? This is Luke from Coffee House, and today we're going to do reviews a little bit differently. This is going to be about a 20, 30, maybe 40-minute video of me just uninterrupted live talking about the Xbloom brewer here, and this is like no cuts, anything like that, so please mind me when I do different cuts and things like that, or pauses, everything. It's going to be a more relaxed review. It's going to be more me talking about my thoughts about this. I even have like a list I'm going to roll through because I just think it feels a little more authentic, and I really don't want to miss any of the talking points about this because the Xbloom has been really interesting to me for the last 30 days, and I think it has a lot of applications not only within kind of the home space, but it also has some commercial applications which I think are pretty interesting. But anyways, I want to talk about the Xbloom here. I want to talk about everything that I wrote down in my little notes app, so we're going to go through that all. But yeah, this is the Xbloom. The Xbloom obviously is a coffee brewer. Many of you have probably seen a lot of reviews about it, all of those things. It's a Kickstarter project originally that had about 1,300 backers, and they raised like 500 grand, which is crazy. And they were, I think, $600 for the Kickstarter backers, but now they're $800. So the Xbloom is $800. But when I talk to you about what it does, if you don't quite understand what it does, you might be able to justify that price, but for a coffee brewer, it feels pretty expensive right out of the gate. But it does quite a bit. And I think this is really specialty coffee's answer to the pod systems that we've seen, you know, Keurig, Nespresso, all of that stuff, because those have been around for so long and they comprise such a large part of the market, but they're really not that good. You can't really control the temperature, grind size, anything like that, but they comprise such a big part of the market because people don't ultimately care about all of those things. They don't really care about brewing coffee with a kettle or doing all of the pour overs or getting into the minutia of the hundreds of different coffee grinders you can buy. I mean, it's just like they want something fast and they want it cheap and they want it right when they wake up, and that's what it does. And so this, I think, is specialty coffee's kind of answer to that thing, and I think it makes everything a lot easier. You're not having to get involved with the pour over setup and everything, and just getting into that whole rabbit hole, which I think specialty coffee people find themselves in a bit of an echo chamber, because really, I think we comprise such a small percentage of the market that this, I think, aims to not only please people like us, but also please the rest of the world. I think there's an understanding of two kind of main points that I want to talk about. There's the understanding that fresh roasted coffee is better, and then there's the understanding that freshly ground coffee is better. I think everybody can tend to agree on that. I feel like there's a consensus around that point. So this really solves those things. And yes, if you didn't know, this does have a grinder built in. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of what we have on the interface, what we have here, and then I'm going to like brew actual coffee on it, because I think that will make a lot more sense. You'll understand a little bit more about what this does. And we're also going to throw in B-roll along this video, even though it's a more casual video, just so you can see all of the things that I'm talking about close up, instead of me just like pointing at things and then you having no really like understanding of what's going on. But anyways, let's go ahead and brew some coffee, and I'll talk, and I think you'll understand very easily all of the things. But just fit and finish really quick. It feels really nice. Most components on this are metal, and it feels very Apple-like, you know, these soft kind of rounded corners, this like space gray feel, and they also have, I think, a white one. I saw they had like a silver one. I don't know if white and silver are the same, but those two things exist. So pretty cool. I think the space gray is nice, especially if you work in like an Apple ecosystem. I think this will feel very familiar to you. But let's go ahead and brew some coffee. But before we brew coffee, I just want to talk about the pod systems here. We have two systems that they provide you with, and essentially this is the one they want you to brew with. This is their X pod, they call it. It's a compostable pod with a built-in filter. And so what you'll do is when you order coffee from them, they'll have a seal on the top with the roaster's insignia, their branding, and there will be pre-dosed whole bean coffee in this, that the roaster will then program these little parameters on here, your grind size, your temperature, and your brew ratio, amongst a couple different other variables that we'll get into when we talk about the app. But that will be all attached to an NFC tag on the bottom, and then you're gonna go ahead and do the things that I will show you what we do, but this is really like the way that they want you to do it, so you go ahead and that's how that brews. It's nice, I have no problems with it. I think the filter does a good job. The extractions have been really nice. I've been making coffee with this every day for the last 30 days, not only because I'm testing it, but because I've actually enjoyed it that much, which is a great thing to see. Secondly is this little plastic guy here, this little kind of like acrylic base. This replaces this metal collar here, which is attached by magnets, but it is metal, which is nice. And so this actually sits just like that, and you can put a filter in there. We just had Kalita filters at the office, so they were the 185, so I had to cut them, but they work fine. You know, they do the job. It's very similar to the filter in there. And then this fits perfectly in there too, so if you had a blank pod like this with a tag, you could do it this way, but usually, you know, with these blank ones that I have, I just put it in this and just brew it how I would normally. But anyways, let's just make some coffee, and I think that will really help people understand how this works and how, you know, everything goes through. So what I'm doing is I'm doing 15 grams here with our coffee. This is a Burundi that I really, really enjoy. Many of you can check it out on the website. We put it on there. It's a yeast inoculated Burundi. It's really, really delicious. But so 15 grams in here. I think 15 grams is kind of like what they tend to shoot for. All the pods I've tried have about 15 grams in them. So I'm gonna do that, 14.9, 15. And then, so I don't have an NFC tag on the bottom here, but what I've done is in the app, I've programmed this one to actually work for this coffee. But we'll talk a little bit more about the out-of-box settings on this, which were actually really good. But trying to scale off, and then I'm gonna, since I don't have the NFC thing, I'm gonna tap this one. It's gonna read it, and then read me some parameters, so grind size, the temperature, and the ratio. And then up here, this is the cool part, I'm gonna pour the whole beans in there. And so that's done. There's also this little plastic cover, which I think is like the intentions that it doesn't spill coffee out of it, but I don't know, it works. But that goes there, and then what I'm gonna do is take my mug, slide that under there, and just tap down, and then it's gonna do its thing. So you see over here, obviously it's starting to grind, you'll hear it, and I'll be quiet for a second. So you can hear it kind of like over grinding, running the motor for a little bit longer, and that obviously you could adjust with the app. But I've seen a lot of like the pre-packaged pods still go over a little bit, which I think is just kind of like, if things were a little slow, you know, it kind of overcompensates. But now we're grinded and it's moved back over, which is pretty cool. Anybody who hasn't seen this yet is probably like astounded at this point because it's so interesting. And there's a little fan here that's blowing air, and you can it's a really aromatic experience, which I like because it feels like you're on the other side of the room. You can still smell it, which I like. And so we're seeing water come out of here. This is the bloom phase now. A little bit large of a bloom, if I'm being honest, but does the job. Anyways, so you might have seen this from there, but you'll definitely see it in the B-roll, is the actual stream of water is kind of moving in a circular motion, which I think is really interesting. They're using 4 poles up here inside of the actual pour-over chamber that's using static electricity to pull the water around, which I think is a really kind of like creative engineering feat when it comes to handling that. Obviously, we cannot play with the flow rate here, which could be a cool thing in the future, but it's not something that we have at our control right now, which I think, you know, hoping that something like that happens. So yeah, we're just brewing coffee here. It's just doing its thing. You might be asking how we're getting water. And so there's a water tank on the back, which holds about 700 milliliters of water. So, I mean, realistically, 2 brews per fill-up, which is kind of small, but just in the outfit of like where this is and the amount of volume that the coffee's brewing, like a Keurig, for example, or an espresso has a large brew chamber and brews such like small amounts that it'll last you longer. But Xbloom have told us and left in like a couple comments that they do have plans on doing more of like a hard line version. So for like a commercial environment, they'll be able to do that. Okay, so we're all finished with the brew here. I had to take a little cut because we had some people walking around. But this pod is like kind of had a little saturated problem, which I haven't seen yet. So don't think that this is normal. We've brewed like hundreds of pods. But it did happen this time, maybe a little bit of clogging in here, or maybe some type of like little defect with the filter. But yeah, it'll beep when it's done, and then your coffee's done. And it's really extracted well. Like every time I feel like I've really enjoyed my cup. And what I like is it's so consistent because you're not doing like a pour over where you're like, okay, I'm gonna go counterclockwise this time instead of clockwise, or I'm gonna do this. It's just so difficult to like understand where your dose consistency is at. So it's tough, but this obviously solves that problem. I also like that it doesn't just like kind of routinely drip and make this a mess. It tends to like be done when it's done, you just a couple drops. One thing that I do have a problem with though is sometimes when you're using more like higher elevation coffees and things like that that have a lot of chaff production, you know, like silver skin in the lining and everything, some of the actual static will kick over and land in your cup, which you'll be be pulling them out a little bit or something like that. But thankfully that didn't happen for this cup. And it actually brews at a nice temperature, so like this is probably still too hot to drink, but it's really nice. I enjoy it, and we're gonna put it to the test here too. I have my little VST guy here, so I just want to kind of understand what our current extraction is and just kind of like see where we're at. So let's go ahead and just put a little bit of coffee in a vessel to cool it really quick. I'm just curious to find out what it's gonna look like. Let's cool that down a little bit. All right, we're in here. And so I've been getting about 1.3, which is pretty normal. So same with here, I've got 1.25, which is nice, you know, like that's really not that bad. It's kind of right on par with where you want to be. 1.3 is kind of what we tend to shoot for brewed coffee, anywhere between 1.3 and 1.4. So maybe a little under, but if you saw in the brewing there, we were like almost at the full course setting. So there's a lot of room to mess around with, which I enjoy. So should be good to take some sips now. And yeah, it's good. I mean, it feels properly extracted. The grounds consistency is pretty decent. And I think that's the big thing is like, you get a good all-in-one system here. It's not like a portion of it is lacking where you're like, I wish I could just do my own grinder and put it in there. This isn't really for the people who are like, oh, I want to get my own grinder. I feel like this is for the rest of the 90% of people who just want like better coffee in the morning and still want to do pods because it's just so easy. The one thing I really want to talk about though is the pod system and the pod infrastructure on like a business level though, because that's something that I've found that a lot of people don't talk about that I think is kind of a big hang up and a big problem right now is that currently Xbloom, what they're doing is they're getting coffee that's roasted by different roasters and shipped to their facility, and then they're packing the actual pods, the beans into pods at their facility, and then sending them out to customers. And you might be following my logic here. If the goal is freshly roasted and freshly ground coffee, one of those two pillars, the freshly roasted portion, is subject not only to the lead times and the production times of the roaster, but it's also subject to the transit and lead times and production times, and then an additional transit for them to be packed into pods and sent out. So clearly we might not be getting the best freshly roasted coffee out there, but Xbloom definitely has intentions to change that. They've talked to me, their lead business development guy has talked with me at length about the infrastructure involved in getting roasters pod filling machines, which I think is definitely a great, a great idea because it will help kind of cut down that roasted lead time, but also it's a big investment for roasters to jump into, especially smaller roasters. Smaller roasters, like, they didn't want to get into the pod game in the first place because of the minimums. The machines are so expensive. They've told me that pod filling machines, like the smallest one is anywhere from like $1,000 to $2,000, which isn't terrible, but it's just something to think about when you talk about the infrastructure here. Personally, I would just like to buy a bunch of these, and just to interject here really quickly about like the like weird kind of like saturation here. It's like this one, I don't know why it happened like that, but like this is another one that we just brewed coffee with, so this one doesn't have any weird saturation problems. I honestly have no idea went down here, it looks the same otherwise. But yeah, so like usually they're dry though, which is funny. But anyways, so yeah, that was my hang up is, like the idea of like freshly roasted pods has to be built on the backs of the roaster, having a machine to do the type of fulfillment and pod filling, which is just something to think about when you're going ahead and buying one of these. Personally though, I think the machine is great, and if you can go ahead and just subject yourself to the weighing out of the 15 grams of coffee, I think you're in a much better place, just like buying blank pods or buying like one of these and then filters. There was a study recently about like whether pods or filters are more wasteful towards the environment, and they said that pods are actually better. So just something to think about. These are compostable, the actual pods, but you have to rip off the NFC tag. So I like the idea of just buying the blank ones. So they're fully compostable. You just throw them out or use them, plant little plants in them or something. But I like that because I don't have to pay a premium for the coffee. I don't have to wait on the lead times of somebody else doing this like whole thing where they're packing it and sending it to me. And then I don't have to, pull off these NFC tags every time. I can just program this to kind of like one baseline, which the baseline for me, like when we programmed this one, it tended to work pretty well for most of our coffees. So it's always like fun to play around with, but I think the out of the box satisfaction is actually pretty good with this. Like we took it out, we scanned the thing, we ran some coffee through it, and it was like pretty dialed. I've heard a lot of people complaining about under extraction for other roasters pods, but that's something you'll definitely have to play around with if you go the route that I do, where I like still want to nerd out a little bit about like manually filling pods or making my own coffee. But if you're somebody who just wants like pods always delivered, just make sure that the roaster is one, getting you freshly roasted coffee as fast as possible, and then two, getting into just making sure that coffee is properly dialed, because I know people have had that issue before. And obviously I think one thing that we want to talk about is water treatment too, because if you have a pod that a roaster's dialing in and making perfect, they can't control your water unless if you are all under the assumption that you're using like third wave water, for example, like if you're treating water the exact same. But for people like this, I just really can't imagine everybody's going to be doing that. So your coffee may taste really great with RO water that's blended for this kind of like optimal take, but for other people who live in different cities who are just going to use tap water, how's that coffee going to taste, and how much are they willing to really spend in terms of time dialing in this coffee to accommodate their water appropriately. So just another thought there. In terms of issues with the machine, I've probably put 200-300 pods through this. I've had none, which is really nice. I've always wondered, like, is this going to be, from a maintenance perspective, annoying to deal with? But no, it's been great actually. I've had no problems dealing with anything. I'm curious about like what their support structure looks like going forward, because obviously brewers will have problems, especially ones with moving parts like this. So I'm interested to see if they're going to have like a parts catalog where someone like us, we're certified techs for La Marzocco and a lot of other coffee companies. Will they give us a parts catalog? Will they help other roasters warranty machines that they sell, stuff like that? And that, I think, leads me into more of the wholesale side of things, slash like the business side of things, which I think is something that's worth taking a couple minutes to talk about, because I think this machine right here could be a really great opportunity for commercial businesses to take advantage. Not like a restaurant or anything, but I see this as like a great hotel piece. Like you are in your fancy hotel room somewhere, the presidential suite, and you have like a couple like hotel branded pods, and then you go ahead, do the thing, there's like a little info card, you like touch this. I think that's nice. It's a nice elevation above the idea of just like a regular Keurig or like, no coffee in a room, because we work with a number of hotels around our area, and that's always been a challenge. Is like, how can we help customers drink coffee in their hotel rooms, because we've built nice cafes in the lobbies and things like that. But I think this is like a nice kind of middle ground. It still allows us to best represent our coffee, but we're still not going to be able to nail down like the fresh roasted aspect of that like we would in the lobby cafe or something, where we can perfectly kind of put coffee through every week, just because of the minimums of pods. But if we can produce pods in-house with the right infrastructure, this will work. It'll work better. But also, it's the idea of selling a hotel on the idea of like buying, 100 of these. 80 grand later, it's a lot of money for somebody to drop on something like this from a commercial level. But it is cool, and obviously you could like hardline it there. But the Nespresso machines aren't hardlined in other rooms that I've been in, so you kind of know how to fill it and stuff. Another thing that I think is interesting is like this is the lid for the fill in the back. A lot of people drop it into the water reservoir because it like fits so perfectly and it's kind of easy to do. And I've done it before a number of times, and then you have to like take the whole thing off and dump it out, which, it happens, but it's just kind of like a funny little design thing. Maybe like, I don't know, a hinge or something could be good. I haven't really thought of like a great example, but that is something to think about. It's like, you will probably definitely drop it. I'm gonna look at some notes. I just wanna make sure I'm covering everything. Let's talk about the app. What I'll do is I'm gonna screen record on my phone, and I'm gonna go through the app so we can put that on the on the actual video here. But so go ahead, open Xbloom, and I should be already connected. Looks like we are. There's a nice little kind of like roasters, different roasters you can do, and if you click on them, it'll take you to the website, and then it takes you to page not found, which is nice. But anyways, there's your profile here. There's your past recipes. There's your actual machine, which you can log into. It says it's online. And then if I go ahead and tap my pod here, I don't have water in it. But it detected the pod anyways. It'll beep like that if you don't have water in it. But there's two modes here. There's quick edit and get creative. So I can go ahead and quick edit with these little sliders here. So the grind size, which are arbitrary numbers between 1 and 30. This one was at 25. The water temperature, so it says 210 on here, but my app only lets me control it to 203, which is not exactly accurate. I can go all the way down to, let's see, will it let me? All the way down to 185 to up to 203. So pretty good range. I would like if it could go to like 207. I think that would be like ideal. And then grounds to water ratio, we can go 1 to 10 all the way up to 125. And then let me go ahead and click Get Creative Mode, which is where we can adjust not only the grind size, grounds, but we can also increase the bloom as well, the temperature, the water volume for the actual bloom itself, and then the pattern. So we can do a center bloom, a circular, or a spiral, which is really interesting. We can adjust the amount of pause between the bloom, and we can also do a vibration, which this little arm right here will like shake back and forth, which is pretty cool. And then I can go all into the actual different pours here. So there's the bloom, and then 1 pour, 2 pour, 3 pour, all the same type of things. So we can do vibration before, after, which is their version of agitation, because since we can't control the flow rate of that stream, we're not going to get the type of agitation that we want. Like when you do those deep pours with a gooseneck kettle, it's going to get all those grounds coming up and everything. Everything's going to be properly extracted, which isn't the case for such a light pour. So I think the agitation definitely helps there. But so we have those 3 pours and then the bloom, which is a nice, touch. We can do a lot of interesting things there. And that's really it about the app. You can save different modes in there depending on the different NFC tags there, but really kind of an interesting thing. I think the app is really well done in a world and an ecosystem where apps kind of suck. All right, let's see what else we got here. I think, let's see, we talked about the out of the box, the app, we talked about the preform pods, we talked about the use in commercial applications, we talked about who this is really for, which I think isn't just the specialty coffee enthusiast, but this is to help communicate the 2 pillars. We talked about, freshly roasted coffee, freshly ground coffee, to those who are interested in getting a better cup of coffee than like an espresso or some type of Keurig pod system, which I think just routinely yields poor coffee. And yeah, I know. I mean, I think the difference here, the main thing that I kind of want to close up is like looking at something like this versus a company like Fellow. I think Fellow is catering so specifically to the entry level barista or like the entry level like specialty coffee enthusiast, which I think is just such a small portion of the market. I think this though, on the other hand, is creating something new and something innovative that is like, hey, we don't want to sell to the people who are doing the home pour over setups. Like, that's not our game. I understand why people do that. You know, it's very interactive and things. We want to sell to the other 95% of the customer base that are interested in just having better coffee. And so if you can communicate to the rest of the people, I think it's a really interesting kind of juxtaposition to what Fellow's doing, where Fellow is like, oh yeah, you know, like you can buy your scale, you can buy your kettle from us, you can buy your brewer, and like all of this stuff you can buy, and then $800 later you have spent the same amount of money as this, but you know, in the morning time when you wake up frustrated, you have to get to work, do you really want to do that whole thing? Do you want to heat your water from room to boiling? Do you want to do the whole pour over, the grind, the weigh, the dose, all of those things, or do you just want to have something do it for you? Obviously a portion of individuals are going to be always in the field where they're like, yeah, I want to do that whole thing. I want to have the interactive experience, and I want to be able to control all the variables myself. But a lot of people, you know, even a lot of instances, including myself, I think this is a better morning coffee brewer. I think the kettles and the Fellow ecosystem and the other ecosystem of like Good Grinders, stuff like that, is going to be great for nerding out about coffee. But I think this is the proper morning coffee brewer. I just think that's a good way to say it. It's like, this is just like no frills, like you just do it and it's the same every time and you like that. And so this allows, I think, those individuals who aren't too into the specialty coffee world to understand what specialty coffee means and what the roaster intends for it to mean, because they're controlling the parameters. All that this individual has to do is just click this and tap the little pod, and then you're good to go. And it's going to be the same every time, and it's going to be different when you try different pods, and that will help kind of like really understand a baseline of what those different coffees mean when it comes to you know, origin, process. All of those things I think are really interesting. But yeah, so I think that's everything I wanted to say about the Xbloom. I think this was a better format for me because I feel like I can really just cover all of my bases. I can talk about all of the cool things that this brewer does and my like honest, unfiltered opinion about where I think it sits in the marketplace, and just kind of like my more philosophical coffee ideals when it comes to this little guy right here. But yeah. If you have any further questions, please leave them down below. I probably didn't cover everything, but I tried to cover as best as I could all of the things that compose the Xbloom, because it is such a unique, different coffee maker. You know, it's something that we haven't seen before in the specialty coffee world, and I think it's a really cool starting point for what's to come. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for kind of like just chatting with me in a more conversational, kind of like more relaxed video like this. I hope you like it. Let me know what you think about this versus like a cut down video, which I think obviously a lot of people will like, for, you know, maybe if you have a short attention span or something like that. But I think this is good. Thanks again for watching. I'm Luke from Coffee House, and we'll see you next time. That's like the best way to show someone that you like them, is to stalk them. Yeah. Or you like, you scope out their house, find out like what food they deliver, and then you work for that company. You like, it's like you in a Pizza Hut uniform.